A Fickle Twist of Fate by Kit Carroll. Chapter 1. Morwen.
"Morwen!" bellowed Winora.
By the Fae, where has that child got off to now?
She groaned as she turned to go back inside the apotheca.
Should have been back by now. Daydreaming, no doubt, she grumbled. Meanwhile, at the edge of the forest, Morwen could hear her grandmother's call from over the hills.
Oh no! Morwen looked up to see the sun had fully risen. The caravans would be lining up, clogging the streets as they traded their wares. The hamlet was the last stop before the long road to the capital.
Morwen looked into the basket she was supposed to be filling.
It was only half full, but she knew her Gran would see it as half empty.
She whipped off the kerchief that held back her long, tawny brown hair and tied it around the basket to keep the herbs from flying out. Then grabbed her shoes, no time to put them on, tying the leather laces together and slipping them over her shoulder. She bolted out of the trees and down the hillside, her hair flying in the wind.
At the top of the tallest hill, she looked out over the hamlet and could see the multitudes of carts and wagons pulled by all manner of beasts.
The longest line was forming in front of her Gran's apotheca.
Morwen raced across the back garden and flung open the door to the storeroom without stopping to put her shoes on. She knew her feet would be sore and bruised, but there was no time to stop. "I'm here, Gran," she shouted, setting the basket by the workbench. "There weren't as many herbs on the edge this season, but I think there are some thatches deeper in the forest."
You're not going deeper into the Fey woods, so don't even think about it. Get busy and help the next in line. Gran pointed to a boy holding a basket with one hand and tossed an apron to Morwen with the other.
"Mind your hair," she added as she turned back to the customers.
Morwen whipped her kerchief off the basket and wrapped it around her tangled mane. She shoved her feet into her shoes, making a note to clean the dust out of them when the day was done. She scampered out of the stockroom, tying the apron on as she went. "Hello there. What can I help you with?"
The boy gaped at her for a moment before coming to his senses. "Sorry, I've never seen ears quite like yours before." Morwen blushed. She reached up and pulled the kerchief over the slight points of her ears that marked her as a Kirith. "Don't tell Gran you saw. She'll be sore at me." "I won't," the boy smiled.
He couldn't have been more than 11 years old. "I'm Callum."
"I'm Morwen."
They shook hands, and then she said, "What can I get you, and what are you bartering?"
"Well, my dad gave me a list." He handed over a small piece of parchment. The hand was uneven, and the spelling iffy, but she could make out the words.
"And I'm bartering some eggs." He lifted the cover of the basket to reveal 24 eggs. "They're fresh, mind. I tend the hens myself." Callum beamed with pride. Morwen ran a shrewd eye over the eggs. Knowing the value of an egg in the hamlet, she took a deep breath and prepared to haggle.
"The eggs are good for about half the list, but do you have any hens that are all laid out?" "Why would you want a laid-out hen?"
"I know a good hen keeper never parts with a good brooder if he can help it, but if you have a laid-out hen that's going to be dinner anyway, that'll cover the rest of the list, and I can throw in a bit of the herbal salt."
Callum pursed his lips and thought about it. "I don't know."
Morwen leaned in and lowered her voice. "I tell you what,
You give me the eggs and the hen, and I'll let you take your best layer out to see O'Henry."
Callum gave her a suspicious look. "A season ago, Gran took a chick as payment. Travella said it would be a good layer. You should have seen how mad she was when our hen turned out to be a Henry. Only thing that saved him from the stew pot is he crows just before sunrise." "A full Kirith season?" Callum asked, confused. "How many years is that?"
Morwen lowered her voice to a whisper. "Does it matter? O'Henry is a Kirith rooster. He may outlive Gran."
Callum's eyes bugged out as he realized what she was offering.
"You mean I could get a clutch out of a Kirith bird?"
Morwen smiled. "Costs me nothing extra for you to get your clutch. I get the hen and the eggs. You get the list taken care of. Deal?"
"Deal!"
Callum shook on it and dashed out the door to get the hens, while Morwen took the eggs to the back of the storeroom and began looking through the bottles and crocks for the herbs, salts, unguents, and ointments. She made sure everything was capped, carefully wax-sealed, and wrapped for travel when Callum came back with a red hen for Morwen and a cream-coloured hen he took to the barn. And so the day went along. Morwen haggled and packed. As the sun began to set, her Gran took to the stockroom to sit and prepare the packages, giving her a moment off her feet and leaving Morwen to take care of the last of the orders.
"How can I help you?" she asked the last of the day's customers. A gentleman in a fine travelling cloak approached the counter.
"Well, young miss, you can take my list to that fine woman back there and tell her Gerald is at the counter."
Morwen looked at the tidy scrawl and recognized Kirith lettering. She looked up to see the gentleman remove his cap, exposing slightly pointed ears and greying hair.
Morwen smiled and went back to the stockroom.
"Someone named Gerald to see you, Gran." "What? Oh, I must look a fright." She patted her hair into place, gazing into the tiny mirror perched over the shelf.
She eased off the chair and gingerly walked out to see her visitor. She closed the door to the stockroom for a little privacy.
Morwen began looking for the items on the list and preparing a basket to carry them all. The list was extensive, and she could tell she would be busy making more remedies after they locked up. After filling and securing the basket of wares, she waited for the conversation to lull before she opened the door and intruded.
"May I say, Winora, your granddaughter is the picture of loveliness."
He turned to Morwen and smiled.
"Your parents must be very proud."
Morwen blushed and mumbled a thank you, thinking, "If you only knew,"
as she handed over the order.
"Gerald, it's been a pleasure." Winora held out a hand, and Gerald took it.
"Winora, enchanting as always." He brushed his lips over her knuckles with the barest of kisses. "Think about what I said, won't you?"
"I always do." Morwen could see the lightest flush in her Gran's cheeks. Gerald doffed his cap and left. Winora heaved a weary sigh that Morwen could feel in her bones. "Help me up to bed, love." Morwen went to the stockroom and untied a length of rope, flipping the stop on a pulley system and lowering a cask that had been rebuilt into a chair.
When the heavy seat was firmly planted on the ground, Winora sat down, and Morwen helped secure her in it. She returned to the length of rope and began hauling on the end, hand over hand, until the pulleys engaged and the chair began to rise. She was grateful for the stops the smith had fitted, so she could raise the chair without worrying that her Gran would fall if she let go.
When she reached the end, she tied off the length and used the stairs in the front of the shop to get up to the loft and then into the attic room. The chair had come through a hole in the floor, and Morwen docked the seat so her Gran could get out safely. Morwen had fallen through the hole only twice before she'd gotten the hang of it. Now it was routine. "Thank you, love." Winora eased out of the chair and hobbled to her bed. "I'm off to sleep now. Go lock up and cover anything not finished. Anything finished needs to be put away."
She heaved her old bones into bed with a groan.
"Oh, and wash your feet and clean out those shoes. Don't think I didn't notice."
"Yes, Gran." Morwen went back down and locked the front door. She watched through the windows a moment as the lamplighters began making their way down her street.
There were still carts and wagons, but the roads were less congested. She counted the ones she could see and went back to the stockroom.
At the counter she took down each and every jar, bottle, cellar, sack, and crock, taking stock of what was low.
After refilling the dry stores and finding full replacements for the wet stores, she got out mortar and pestle. She ground pastes and powders until the last rays of sunlight died away and she could hear her Gran snoring in the attic. Morwen cleaned up before going out the back door. She walked in the full moonlight to the well in between the apotheca and the barn and heaved up a bucket of water to wash off her feet. The rest of the bucket was emptied into the small aqueduct that ran the length of the garden, watering the plants Winora cultivated near her house. She began dusting out the insides of her shoes, making sure to clean away any grit, when she heard some clucking on the other side of the well. She put her shoes on and laced the thongs before peering around the well to find O. Henry scratching in the yard. "Gave Callum the slip, did you?" He simply clucked and bobbed. "All right, back to the barn." But he shied away from Morwen's gentle fingers. "Oh, Henry, I don't have time to chase you." She reached out, but again he danced away with a little hop. "What's gotten into you?" The rooster stayed just out of reach, never running, but refusing to be caught. In the daylight, she could count on the village children to help corral the ornery poultry, but at night she was on her own. After following him to the edge of the yard and grimacing as he ducked under the gate and into the road, Morwen gave in to her frustration. "Don't you dare cross that road. I'll butcher you myself if you do." O. Henry turned his head, and Morwen could almost swear he gave her a wink before fluttering over the road and dashing into the shadows. "Why, you cheeky bird!" Morwen could see his tail feathers glinting in the light at the edge of the smithy. Beyond that was the path to the woods. She wasn't allowed out of the yard at night. In fact, she wasn't even supposed to be out of doors after the sunset, but she could not tell Gran she'd lost the rooster. O. Henry was the only other living thing her Gran loved besides her horse and Morwen herself. There was no way that chicken was escaping on her watch. Morwen looked around, and then she looked back at the attic window.
It was open, and she could just hear the soft sound of Winora's snoring. She bit her lip and climbed the fence. Beyond the yard the wold was dark and wide, but she could hear O. Henry clucking just around the corner of the smithy. If she could sneak up on him and nip him back to the barn, Winora would never know.
Stepping with care around rocks and the random piles of droppings from beasts of burden, she made her way to the shadow of the smithy. Easing round the corner, she could just see the rooster in a patch of moonlight.
She was about to pounce when the smithy tomcat gave a screech and leaped at O. Henry from the porch.
The rooster took off into the night, and the cat growled at a missed chicken dinner. "Patches, you dolt!" Morwen whispered to the one-eyed Tom.
Patches rolled over in the dust as Morwen went running up the path to keep the rooster in sight.